exploring the natural world one podcast episode at a time. This is For What It's Earth.
Hi all, and thank you for joining me for another episode of For What It's Earth by me, Marissa Jacobs of the Art of Ecology, and joined for this third episode by semi-permanent guest, Sam Rebuck. Sam, say hi.
Hello.
Awesome. Today we are going to be discussing the ocean and climate change's impacts on the ocean. So we were last week focusing on the sky, and we talked about weather and how climate change is impacting severe storm events, how it's moving air currents. And we talked a little bit, we touched on it with how climate change also might impact ocean currents. And today we're going to go kind of in depth with the ocean overall. So we're going to have some weird little words in here like bleaching, acidification. So I just want to kind of talk about those first. So when we talk about bleaching, it is not us dumping bleach into an ocean. It is a change in the pH, which goes with acidification and how that impacts corals. So Sam and I were super into marine biology, but we lived in middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, so that our ocean time was severely limited. But Sam, have you ever seen a coral in the wild?
Actually, yes.
Ooh.
We've seen, washed up coral.
Yeah, I have lots of like little coral bits that I found just on like beach trips and stuff like that. Actually, that one right there is a pretty hefty chunk of it that we found washed up. But I don't know if you've ever seen I've seen pictures and documentaries and stuff like that of the real healthy corals. But I've never actually seen one.
Me neither.
Oh.
And I had probably the opportunity to in Mexico, but we didn't do it. So it's on the list.
When we were in Greece, we spent a lot of time in the Aegean Sea, and which is right like near Poseidon's temple. And so that was super cool just to be like, I'm at Poseidon's temple right now, having my interactions with marine ecosystems, but it was with sea urchins instead of corals. So I don't have experience with actual corals, but oh well, they are super cool in all the pictures. And I love the little bits of them that I find. It's so cool to look at them and see all the little patterns.
I know.
And yeah, like it is so, let me see if I have, So here I have a couple chunks that I found. Not that this makes great podcast material, but I'll show you anyway.
So cool. That's got a nice branch on it.
Yeah. And then I have this little one, which has you can actually see the kind of star-shaped patterns or polka dot.
Yeah, that's what we find at Myrtle Beach when we go.
Yeah. So these were both Atlantic Ocean corals. In Jersey is where I had found those washed up on the beach. This one's just a basic chunk.
Yeah.
Meteor, a little asteroid. But they're always so cool to look at. And it always fascinates me when I think about the corals. Like I have these little bits and we think of them as rocks or shells, things like that. But they're little animals, these microorganisms that are this huge, huge community of little living creatures. And it's astounding to me to think of them as actual animals.
That's such a good point because I tend to forget about that when we see them. Yep.
Yeah. But that definitely leads to how, we hear a lot about on the news, the coral bleaching. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit of why that is an issue, of just, what is actually happening with the oceans that causes some of these problems. Because we were talking about the storm events, but storms are storms, right? And we think about the ocean. The ocean is this big, vast thing. So just kind of getting some understanding about that. So with the coral bleaching, ultimately, we have the ocean acidification is happening, which is caused by a buildup of carbon dioxide. The last week you were talking about carbon dioxide building up in the atmosphere. Do you know how it gets then into the ocean? Like is it like pulled down, or is the ocean absorbing it on its own? Do you know? I truly don't.
I'm not quite sure, but I do know. I mean, I think we talked about there's like a carbon dioxide cycle. You touched on that last week.
Right.
But how does it come down? Not exactly sure. That's a good question.
Oh, I might know. How do plants work? Plants breathe in carbon dioxide. Well, because then for a hot second I was like, oh, the photosynthetic algae. And then maybe.
I mean, that definitely
they're taking. I guess when they die, that's
what I was thinking.
Carbon. We're scientists here. We know things. That's okay. But ultimately, there's carbon dioxide buildup in the ocean, which impacts temperature, I know, but it also impacts the overall pH of the ocean, which if you have like a fish tank at home or a pool, you always want to be conscientious of the pH. And when the pH is lowered, it becomes more acidic. So that's what's happening kind of in the ocean. And that impacts all of the animal and the plant life that's trying to survive there, which ultimately impacts the corals. And corals are all these little houses and things like that. Did you find? Okay.
No.
No. Oh.
There was a sentence of the carbon cycle. Now I forget. And this is directly from the National Ocean Service.
Okay.
In the case of the ocean, carbon is continually exchanged between the ocean's surface waters and the atmosphere, or is stored for long periods of time in the ocean depths.
Cool. So ultimately, we were right. It's there. The process, we're just going to kind of gloss over that. And you can, if you're listening, you can do more in-depth research if you would like. But ultimately, carbon's in the ocean too. Although that kind of leads me to an interesting point. I had read an article, I think it was just in the science journal, about how the currents that are super close to the surface, that are near air currents, are speeding up due to climate change, and how that is impacting migration of marine animals. It's impacting the temperature, because you have these quicker movements, and how it's getting cooler on the top, but then it can't absorb the heat as well. So animals that need the hot or warmer waters can't migrate through their routes anymore. I thought that was interesting.
It is very
that connection between air and ocean.
Yeah.
I will try to find that article. Let's see. It is titled "Global Warming is Speeding Up Ocean Currents. Here's Why." And it is in science.org. But it was an interesting read.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
So
not cool that's happening.
Not cool that it's happening.
I always think that when I say that, when I say that to people, that's cool. It's not cool, but as a scientist, it is cool.
Yeah, it is fascinating and interesting how the two systems are connected. And I often think back to, in one of our marine bio classes, we said, you were excited.
I found it. It is absorbed from the atmosphere and then dissolves into the water. There we go.
There we go.
According to the Center for Science Education.
I would utilize them as a good resource. Okay, so it's dissolved.
Sorry.
Awesome. Yes. No, that's okay. That's fine.
Marine bio.
Yes. So in marine bio, we had this cool final. Well, I thought it was super cool where we had to watch Finding Nemo and then kind of go through the movie and absolutely trash it and say how all these things were biologically incorrect. And then at the same time, be like, this is what they did really well. And I thought that was just such a fun little final to kind of get us thinking critically and analyzing. This kids movie that I love Finding Nemo. It's fantastic. But I always remember then, there in the movie, if you have not seen it, these little fish are traveling around searching for his lost son, Nemo. But he uses ocean currents to kind of move faster. So as I was reading that article, it made me, and it was talking about migration and how animals are no longer able to utilize currents in the same way because they rely on the hot or the warmer waters. And now these are moving too fast, so they're not absorbing the heat as much. It was just a cool little connection in my head. It's like, oh, I remember Finding Nemo had currents.
And the sea turtles in the current.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of animals then impacted by the ocean currents. We have the sea turtles, whales migrate. We've got
some sharks migrate, right?
Yeah, the sharks that migrate, and the whale sharks do. So there's a lot of animals then that are impacted. And those are animals that also help to regulate other species. Like you have the sea turtles regulating jellyfish populations. You have whales and the filter feeders impacting lower tier populations. Right. So it's very interesting how, again, everything's connected.
Yes. Yep.
In one of my classes, one of my professors was from Maine. That's where he grew up. So he was telling us all about lobsters and how his prediction was that eventually lobsters and shrimp are going to be all that's left in the ocean because you're going to have all of these like corals bleaching. So then you have the fish population dying off. So all of the detritus and the gunk on the bottom, all those little dudes are going to be thriving in their population, and there's not going to be predators anymore. So he was getting really excited that the price of shrimp and lobster was going to go down in like 20 years, maybe. So that was just like my little takeaway of, oh, hey, the price of lobster is going to be so affordable. Like, great.
Yeah, but then we'll pull in the supply and demand thing. And they'll be like, oh, there's so much of it, but now everyone wants it. So let's make it more expensive.
Oh, that's true.
Capitalism at its best.
Just let us appreciate the climate change lobsters.
I know.
But yeah, so ultimately, there's a positive kind of weird spin on that. But I also wanted to just touch on both of us were these little rinky-dink Pennsylvania people, and yet we had this passion for marine biology. And I wanted to pick your brain with how that started, how that came to be, or what, like, how did it happen that someone from inland PA fell in love with the ocean? Because to me, it's just like, a lot of people that I meet are like, oh, the ocean has no impact on me directly because I don't live on a coast. So I wanted to see, like, what was it about us that we managed to love the ocean?
That's a good thought. I think back to, because our teacher that taught us marine biology had a marine bio degree.
Yeah.
So that leads me to also think, what is a marine biology teacher doing in the mountains of Pennsylvania?
Which didn't he also grow up there too?
Yes, he's from the area.
Yeah. So what is he doing?
I don't know. And so I had him in junior high as a general science teacher. And so he talked a lot about the ocean.
Yeah.
And I liked him as a teacher. So when he was like, I'm doing this marine bio class, I was like, you could probably teach me about, I can't even, because I like all science, but think something, the most mundane thing, I'd probably still
physics,
because I liked you. Yeah. I I always had a tie to the ocean. But I don't know. I don't know what necessarily led to my interest in it. I don't know if it's just because it's a science thing and
you just like science.
I did.
Yeah. I mean, right now, for those who are listening, Sam is wearing a shirt that has a little sea turtle on it. So this is, this enervates our lives and what we enjoy, even though.
And I have
Maryland
a turtle rock holder.
Yeah.
It's actually a soap dish, but I have rocks in it.
Whatever. That's fine. You like geology.
Yeah. They're like my inspiration rocks.
I mean, I have a candle tray that is absolutely covered with my shells and my rocks and stuff like that. So I get it. I absolutely get it.
I've got a fish container. I have a turtle painted.
Nice.
Yeah, I got
lots of ocean stuff. So, which I think is kind of cool to see that even we can like this stuff without having to be right next to it. And I think a lot of people kind of forget that you're allowed to just like what you like. As well as the fact that obviously now you and I know that the oceans do impact literally everything. You could be in Nebraska and the oceans impact you. But I think you touched on something that's also really important is you had a teacher who, like you said, you could have learned anything from him. He was a really fantastic teacher. Shout out to Mr. Pasco, 7th and 8th grade and high school science. But I think educators play a really, really huge role in everybody's developmental, if you have a really good English teacher or science teacher or math teacher, like you're more likely to then appreciate these subjects in a new way because you feed off of their enthusiasm for it.
Right.
And you're 100% correct. Mr. Pasco is very enthusiastic about his teaching and science, and he made it really fun and engaging. And I think that almost more than the schools that are along coastal areas, I think it's really important for center land people to be learning about marine biology, marine science. He taught oceanography was one of the little topics, and he made it very relatable to us. And he really demonstrated its impact and why we should care about this. And I think that's really missing in a lot of
definitely.
A lot of education is
and
that relatable factor.
I'm thinking too, so during my internship, I worked for the Department of Natural Resources in Maryland. And obviously in Maryland, the biggest thing is the Chesapeake Bay. And I went to school in South Central Pennsylvania, not far from the Susquehanna River. And so I knew that the Susquehanna River ran right into the bay, which the bay eventually leads to the ocean. And it astounded me the amount of people that didn't realize how the health of the Susquehanna River affected the health of the bay.
Right.
How bad the health of the bay was years ago, and how that directly influences the ocean.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe the people who didn't realize, like, you're in South Central Pennsylvania, but you're still affecting the Chesapeake Bay and the ocean.
Yeah.
And it's a major issue.
It really is.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna kind of tie into that of when I was at the Nature Center. They're an Audubon, a chapter of the Audubon Society. So a lot of people were like, "Oh, you do birds," and we were like, "I mean, yeah, but our primary focus at that while I was there was actually watershed education, and it was really, really cool, even for me." Knowing the science already, one of the activities we did was, what's your watershed address? And so people could look on the map and find what watershed they lived in. And then you'd be like, okay, you're in the Aquatine Creek watershed. All right. So then you're here. And now you flow it, like you were saying, what comes into what? And you could follow the route of the little creek, this little thing that went through people's backyards, follow that to the Tohickon, which then went to the Delaware. And how everybody knew the Delaware, you go there for recreation, you go there, there's economical impacts there, it flows through Philly, so a lot of people knew it, and how then that flows into the ocean. And people were like astounded, like you were saying, that what they did in their lawns impacted marine birds.
Right. Yes, that's exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. Exactly. And it's interesting that we got to this topic because as I was kind of sitting thinking about the oceans, I wonder, and this is something I don't know at all, how climate change, if it is, affecting the Great Lakes. Because and for us, it wasn't as big of a ecosystem that we thought of because of, again, our location. We were not remotely close to a Great Lake. So I don't know if because that's a big part of life for those communities up there.
Right. I know my brother lives in Cleveland, so he gets a lot of lake effect weather events, being near Lake Erie, which is one of the Great Lakes. And so I know he would tell me a lot about, I would think being closer than I am to the Midwest, you would have a lot more drier conditions, but he would tell me about huge, huge rainstorms and a lot of snow, which then, we know that area gets some pretty bad winters, but I would imagine based on what you were teaching me last time about weather, that now all of those weather effects would be exacerbated and made more extreme. So
I guess, I don't know though, for sure, especially because learning about lake effect snow, I always thought of it as an extreme condition. And my in-laws live in central New York, so they get some of that as well. They're not in Buffalo, so they don't get it quite as bad, but they're still affected. And I haven't really noticed them saying anything about more snow. So I don't know. That's something I feel like I'll need to try to keep an eye on this winter to see because I would think so. I would think it would affect it. But then also not just the weather, but the actual you were saying about the pH in the water and the life in the Great Lakes. I don't know.
Well, so I'm now looking, and one thing that I was like, oh, this is interesting. So the EPA calls it out and says that in recent years, warmer surface temperatures in the Great Lakes have contributed to lower water levels by increasing rates of evaporation, which ultimately causes lake ice to form later than usual, extending the season for evaporation, which is going to be impacting all of the life that's in the water. Right. You're going to have, the different plant life that now is like, we don't have the water levels we need. You're going to have the fish that live there are going to be impacted, the amphibian life, even the bird life, like herons,
Right.
cormorants, things like that, would be impacted by that. And I would think that would impact water bird migration as well.
Right. That's what I was just thinking.
If you have kind of longer seasons of no ice, but then you're going to have more competition than to eat the things that live there. Because now all the birds are like, hey, we can hang out here even longer.
Right. And then with the lower water temperatures, they're going to start losing those food sources most likely.
Yeah.
And even the temperature changes. I mean, they're typically a more colder water. So as the temperatures are increasing, the life in there it's either going to adapt or it's going to die off because they can't handle the changes.
Yeah. And this all goes back to like the human caused climate change is just happening too fast and things are having a hard time adapting to it. And it'll be very interesting to see what does actually make it and how. I think a lot of, the little turtles and frogs and things that will burrow into mud. Well, they're not going to necessarily have to, but then that means that they're eating a lot of the plants for longer. So now is that contributing to erosion as the plant population is dwindling, which leads to water health in our reservoirs and things like that. I'm just like, oh my gosh. But that kind of the ice thing brings me to something that, not that I learned this recently, but I had a new way to visualize it, which I thought was really helpful. I had a teaching climate change course through National Geographic Society of how to teach so it's not super scary, as well as better ways to communicate it with new scientific models, with mapping, cool data visualization. And one of the activities that they had us do was, a lot of people are confused by the ice melting and impacts of ice melting. How is that making sea level rise? Because when we have a cup of water and we put ice cubes in it, which would be icebergs, glaciers, things like that. When you put your ice cubes in, it makes the sea level or the water in your cup go up a little bit because there's stuff in there. Right. But then when the ice melts, it's not suddenly even more. So a lot of people have a hard time. They're like, well, how are these icebergs melting, impacting it? And then they had us have a plate with ice cubes on it, which represents the ice on land. And people seem to forget that there is ice on land. Right. And then put the cup right there and have all the ice melt into our cup. And now the cup is overflowing. And it was just an interesting way for me to visually process that. Yeah. Of how we're not just thinking of the icebergs in the ocean that are melting. That's not necessarily, it's contributing to temperature changes, but it's not contributing to sea level. Exactly. All of these glaciers on land, all of the ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic that are now thawing and melting out, how that is impacting sea level rise. I was like, oh, that's just a cool way to visualize it. A very easy way to visualize it as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I never would have thought of it that way, but that you're right. A lot of people forget there's a difference between sea ice and land ice.
Right. But it always
and they do different things.
Place. Yeah. Because you have these high mountains like Himalayas and the Andes, things like that. And they all have a lot of ice and snow melts, things like that you wouldn't be considering right away. And as that extra snow melts, as temperatures on land increase, that's changing the water level.
And there have been some major ice sheets, like I know Greenland, there have been some major pieces that have gone off and gone into the ocean. And again, that's a big thing happening. It's not just little pieces here and there.
No, it's huge.
Ice sheet that just fell into the ocean. it's like the idea of, when there's big avalanches, a little bit of snow at a time is fine. But when you have a major avalanche, it causes a lot of issues.
Yeah, it really does. And because of these water currents, it's pulling all of this excess water, all of this now super cold water, because it's snow and ice that's moving, and it's moving them around. And now that I'm reading that the currents are becoming even faster, it's pulling them around really quickly. Yeah. And that's definitely got some crazy implications on what's going on. I don't know if you have this down in Maryland with the Susquehanna, but I know in PA along the Delaware, because I was doing a lot with watershed health, we have something called the Brewers for the Delaware River, with like beer brewers. And it is this whole group of breweries, microbreweries, breweries, all vineyards, whatever you have, that are along the Delaware River, that are very conscientious about water health of the river, of the ocean that it flows into, because they talk a lot about how the health of the water directly impacts the health of the hops and the health of their individual plants. And so it's really cool to see that sort of perspective of you. Even if you are conscientious about the health of your water, you're thinking more about water, swimming pools, rivers, things like that. You're not necessarily thinking about the funner side of life of like your beer and your ciders. And so they've all kind of ganged together, and they do a lot of the nonprofit partnering of supplying beer to fundraisers and things like that, because they want people to start understanding how important the Delaware River watershed is, and how what these brewers are doing is how that is positively impacting then ocean health as well. And it's just really cool. Do you have any, I know you have a lot of like breweries and things like that where you are. Do you have anything like that for the Susquehanna?
So I don't know about it in Maryland, but I love that you brought this up, because I have a professor from college who started, it started off with a research project. She was doing water quality health, and she was actually, I know she was working on the Delaware River with a few partners, as well as the Susquehanna. Okay. Oh, and then she went into how it affects breweries. She's written a book on it. She teaches classes at Shippensburg about water quality and breweries. And I know, like I said, I know she's done a lot out, and she probably got the idea from the Delaware group, because she was out there a lot, and they were doing a lot of Delaware water gap research.
Okay.
And so that's awesome that I didn't realize that there was like a whole coalition kind of. I knew she did it. I have Dr. Allison Feeney is her name. I'll have to look up her book, because
that is super cool. And
that's awesome.
When you find the book, I'll put that in the podcast description, because that's really cool to see that. And again, it goes back to water health and land health are tied. They are tied together, which we can often kind of correlate that easily with the agricultural scene. Like, plants need the water to survive. We think a lot of irrigation, but we're not thinking of then how that all ties into ocean specific health. We think a lot of the water cycle right here on land. But again, all of that is going to flow in and into the ocean, as we see with how the rivers move. And so what these brewers are doing and how they are growing their hops, how they are growing the plants in an orchard, how that impacts then. I know in the Delaware, Brewers for the Delaware River, it is a partnership with National Audubon. So I do know they talk a lot about marine birds and the birds that would be right along the Delaware River. Right. But again, everything is connected, but it's a cool way to tie the two in. So when you guys are all out there drinking your beers, think about its impact on the ocean. It's a cool little connection there. But what are some ways that, I know we were trying to think about last time with the weather, how people could impact climate change and weather, and we thought about, well, you thought of the renewable energy resources. What are some direct things that people can do to impact ocean health, especially if they are here on land?
And we're trying to think of ocean health in terms of the water itself, not the creatures in it.
I mean, hey, if you've got ways that I can be sitting here in Pennsylvania and be helping out the corals, preventing them from bleaching, which I got so distracted. Bleaching happens when the little algae that lives inside the coral gets pushed out because the coral can't handle it anymore. And so the little algae that added color now is not there. So they lose that color. And then the next step is coral death because they rely on the algae as well. So I got way off when I was originally talking about that. But if you have a way that I can be sitting here and impact positively the corals and the little animals that live inside the corals and rely on them, that's awesome. But I guess water health would be great as well. Yeah. I'll take either idea.
I think participating and actively looking for like river or watershed cleanup. I know in Maryland, there's a lot of it, especially because we have the Potomac River in between Maryland and Virginia, which is very dirty. Trying to take part in river cleanups can always help. And like we've talked about, it all makes it to the ocean eventually.
Yeah.
And so not only will that help your local area because you're cleaning up those local rivers and streams, but it's going to ultimately end up helping the ocean as well.
Right.
What I can think of.
Yeah, that's a good one. I know here in Pennsylvania, there's a lot of focus on erosion just because our number one pollutant here is sediment. So there's a lot of focus in this area about riparian zone buffers, which is the strip of land that borders bodies of water that all those trees and the plants help to hold that bank in place to prevent that excess erosion. But I do know we have a lot of trash cleanups in watershed areas, but there's a lot to do with native plants along those riparian zones, which there can be a lot of volunteer programs that have to do with riparian buffers.
We have similar things to that at the Bay. During my internship, the big thing is seagrass and planting the seagrass because it's been getting killed off as the level in the Bay rises because the seagrass can't survive in the really deep water levels. It needs to be right on the shore. And so as the water level is increasing, it's getting rid of that layer where they originally were growing. So we were working with kids to plant seagrass and to talk about the importance of it. And it also helps with erosion on the beaches as well.
Right. Well, that then leads to the whole like beach stratification.
Yes.
And the layers of the dunes and the different wildlife that lives in each section and the different plants that grow in each section, which I know before you were mentioning the impact of this hurricane on friends and family down in Florida. And now the hurricane has at least happened in some areas. I know it's been wreaking havoc on the Carolinas. But all of the beach health and how maintaining that stratification, maintaining those layers and the plant life there can really help prevent flooding events along coastlines. Right. So another direct correlation to what the weather is doing, it's dumping all this water, it's flooding, it's all this wind, and beach and dune health can really impact that.
So Okay. I was thinking where would beaches fall into the way that the way you've broken out these sessions? I was like, oh, I didn't even think of that when we start talking about oceans. But
what do you think? Would that be ocean health? Would that be terrestrial health, or would that be soil health?
I guess it depends on what you're talking about. I think for me, I would probably link it more to soil health.
Like the sand structure?
Yes, because ultimately, I think it all stretches from there. That's
right. Is if you have that. We'll talk about this then.
Yes.
We'll bring it back. So stay tuned, everyone, for our climate change and soil and geological formation health, where we talk about beaches again and go into more depth with that. There you go. Cool. Well, those are some good actions. So for What It's Earth, if everybody can be actively conscientious about, again, not just ocean health, but the health of your bodies of water right where you are. Think about what your watershed address might be, and then be really conscientious about, okay, well, what am I doing, with fertilizer or chemical runoff? What am I doing with plantings, with litter, things like that would be impacting your creeks, your streams, because everything, just like in Finding Nemo, all drains lead to the ocean, but here we've got all rivers and bodies of water lead to the ocean. So we can be really active to protect our oceans, which if we protect our oceans can protect us as well. So with that, thank you so much for digging deeper into the natural world with the Art of Ecology and with Sam Rebuck. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please support, review, and continue to follow along. We've got some more great episodes coming up for you. And we can be found on any podcast streaming platform. And for more tips and eco-inspiration, you can go to www.theartofecology.com. You can also find me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, all those good things at The Art of Ecology. But before we officially wrap up, do you have anything to plug, Sam?
Yeah, so I'll plug, so For the Love of Beer, Pennsylvania's Breweries is the book by Dr. Allison Feeney. So she is a geography professor at Shippensburg University. She focuses on geographic information systems and just kind of the general geography and cultural geography, which is, I think, one of the focuses of the book, which is often forgot about,
right.
how the culture of it all kind of fits in together. So For the Love of Beer, Pennsylvania's Breweries by Dr. Allison Feeney.
Cool. I will pop a link to that book in the podcast description, because that sounds like a really interesting read. Isn't there like some sort of stereotype about millennials and beer or something? Breweries?
Probably.
I don't know what. But hey, we all have a great time with that. And it's just so cool to be able to connect like something that's more recreational and fun with the health of the planet. So
yeah. Awesome. And she teaches, if you're near Shippensburg or you're looking for something to do, I know she teaches classes periodically on brewing and how to brew, I'm pretty sure.
What? That's super cool.
Yeah.
That is, we have a friend, one of the guys Zach used to work with, made his own mead. And I know I do a lot with foraged cocktails, things like that. So that sounds like right up our alley. Nice. Too bad I don't live close.
She's an awesome professor. I'll plug her too. I had her for multiple classes.
It's nice when you find good educators, right? Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to, again, plug my website. Yeah, Sam did a great plug, so I won't step on her toes this week. But thank you so much. And with that, I will see you next time. Well, we will see you next time on For What It's Earth. Bye.
Bye.